Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang, your intel in the Philippine markets and the economy. In the headlines, President Marcos orders a review of the 880 billion peso proposed budget of the DPWH under the 2026 National Expenditure Program amid the investigation on anomalous flood control projects. The Departments of Budget and Public Works and Highways are giving themselves 2 weeks to write it up.
Kung may doble, tanggalin natin yung doble. No? Pero kailangan natin ng oras. Pero nag-usap kami ni Sekmina at we both agreed it should not be more than 2 weeks.
What this means for the entire 2026 budget, with Senate Committee on Finance Chair Senator Sherwin Gatchalian joining us live. The Economy and Development Council has introduced stricter rules on the approval of flood control projects amid the anomalies. And Metrobank forecasts the August Consumer Price Index to pick up to 1.3%, spot on the median forecast of Business World's poll of 16 analysts. We speak with Nicolas Mapa, Chief Economist at Metrobank. President Marcos orders a sweeping review of the 880 billion peso proposed budget of the Department of Public Works and Highways for 2026. In a statement, the Presidential Communications Office said the president expects the review to yield necessary changes to guarantee transparency and accountability in the DPWH's budget. The move comes after Deputy Speaker Ronaldo Puno and Marikina Representative Marcy Teodoro revealed the existence of funding in the 2026 budget for completed projects. The DPWH and DBM agreed to finish the review within a fortnight.
Limitado ang ating oras. No? Kailangan importanteng mapasa natin itong budget na to dahil hindi lang to budget ng DPWH kundi budget ng buong gobyerno. Nag-usap kami ni Sekmina at we both agreed it should not be more than 2 weeks.
Some House leaders want to return the entire 2026 National Expenditure Program to the DBM to cleanse it from insertions. Proponents of this move are willing to forgo their month-long break in October and unwilling to attend budget deliberations for the meantime.
Hindi kami nanggugulo dito, no? Ang problema namin talaga is ayaw namin tanggapin itong basurang trabaho, no? Tapos kami na naman ang masisisi.
Ang hirap kasing mag-attend ka ng hearing, ng budget briefing, tapos alam mo naman na marami doon ang talagang hindi sang-ayon sa tugon at kumpas ng presidente.
But Budget Secretary Amena Pangandaman said the House's proposal might not be practical, as no NEP had ever been returned to the executive in the middle of deliberations.
Ipapadala natin sa kanila yung bagong listahan, yung mga changes na mangyayari doon. Sa tingin po namin, mas madali yon na proseso at procedure kesa magbalikan tayong ganyan.
Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, chair of the Senate Finance Committee, had earlier asked the DBM to be more detailed in scrutinizing projects being added into the National Expenditure Program. He categorized questionable items in the 2026 NEP with half a dozen red flags, including DPWH projects with no station number, projects divided into phases with similar amounts, projects with phrase with packages and found in the same area, projects with costs that have been rounded off, and projects that have reappeared in the 2026 NEP from the 2025 General Appropriations Act. Well, with us for more is Senate Chair of the Committee on Finance, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. Good to see you, Sen Quinn. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to our televiewers.
So that's 700 pages and about 15,000 line items to go over in the DPWH budget alone. It's a tall order for both SecMina and SecVince. Can they weed out and clean up in 2 weeks or less? What do you think?
Well, it will be a challenge. For example, if they have to go through each and every project, you have to go back to the original documents, making sure that each project will have a feasibility study, detailed engineering, coordination with the local government unit, and so on and so forth. Those are itemized in the DBM circular that was issued for 2026. Basically, the circular is saying no project will be endorsed in the 2026 NEP, 2026 National Expenditure Program, without all of those detailed documents.
It is indeed a process flow, and assuming that they do get it in 2 weeks or less, you and fellow legislators will still have to ensure that the whole budget is aligned with the macroeconomic assumptions, the growth targets that are set by the DBCC. So how will the Senate ensure congruence, especially given the wish list tendencies of some agencies?
Well, Kathy, the first order of business is assuring that the 2026 budget is corruption-free and the projects are indeed well studied and with feasibility studies, and the projects will be felt by the people. That's the first order of business, because you cannot go to the macroeconomic assumptions, alignment with the Philippine Development Plan, if you have projects that are spurious and anomalous. For example, ghost projects, then that will not redound to anything at the end. In fact, the Department of Finance said that those anomalous projects took away almost 118 billion pesos from our economy, because obviously they're ghost projects. So the first order of business is assuring that the projects are credible and well studied.
Well, to get to corruption-free, there's got to be a master plan. I mean, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the master plan for the flood control program. Shouldn't the DPWH come up with that first before budgeting for flood control projects that one wouldn't assume to be ghost?
That's the direction, Kathy. We have river basins all over the country, and those river basins are supposedly the source of flooding in our different parts of the country. And because of that, there should be a master plan per river basin. That should be the bare minimum and updated throughout the years. We will also look for that because the feasibility study should be aligned with the master plan of that river basin. So, in other words, when you propose flood control projects, you have to make sure that the people can feel the mitigating effects and can feel that the flood control projects is indeed working for them.
And all this inquiry and the challenge that we have in 2 weeks or less happening at a time we've got rising debt service costs as well as limited fiscal space. I know that you've pointed out that every Filipino now owes 142,000 pesos because of the country's debt. So with the problem of debt service costs rising and limited fiscal space, how does the Senate plan to balance social protection with infrastructure priorities, especially if we forgo the new taxes, as Secretary Recto has suggested?
Correct. Well, the strategy of the administration is to outgrow debt. If you look at the projected GDP growth, it has to grow between 6 to 7%. Unfortunately, for the last 3 years, we've been growing less than 5.5%. So, in other words, we're not outgrowing debt, but albeit debt is outgrowing our economy. And we need to be very prudent in terms of addressing fiscal deficit, because that's the culprit. If you have an elevated fiscal deficit, definitely we will borrow more. And if you borrow more, that will translate into debt service in our budget. We're now averaging about 15% of our total expenditure to debt service, meaning that doesn't go to any projects, but it goes to just paying off creditors. So we need to balance that. It's a tall order, but we have to do it as we go along. The first strategy is to make sure that the projects will redound to our economy. Construction still remains to be the biggest multiplier at double-digit multiplying effect. But if you have ghost project, there's nothing to multiply. No, so we have to make sure that those construction projects, those infra projects, are realized.
And we're running up against time, 2 weeks or less. What are the chances then that we end up with a reenacted budget?
Well, on the part of the Senate, the senators agreed that we will continue to conduct our budget briefings. I understand that the House has this intention of returning the budget to the executive, but on the part of the Senate, we will continue to conduct our budget briefings to make sure that everything is on time. And if the executive will change the national expenditure program of some agencies, then we will have to just conduct another briefing on that. But so far, we will be conducting our briefing as scheduled.
Should you not be preparing for the possibility of a reenacted budget, though?
I don't want to think that ahead yet. I am trying to be more optimistic because reenacted budget will definitely have some effects to our economic growth, considering that you cannot spend for capital outlay. So as much as possible, we have to do everything we can to get our budget approved by end of the year.
That's true, because it reminds us of the cautionary tales of the repeated reenactment. When you go back to the previous administrations under, say, former President Gloria Arroyo's term, it led to delayed services, stalled infra development, enhanced executive discretion over funds, even greater corruption risks. So this is a scenario that you wouldn't want happening, would you?
Well, the biggest impact will be there's no capital outlay, there's no new projects. So you cannot build new roads, you cannot build new classrooms, you cannot build anything new, basically. And government spending is about 15 to 20% of our economy. So if you take out infra spending, that will definitely impact economic growth because government is one of the biggest drivers of economic growth.
Apart from the impact on economic growth, there is a concern over political patronage. Just looking back to the president, he explicitly said in his State of the Nation address that he will not hesitate to resort to a reenacted budget if the 2026 version is not fully aligned with the National Expenditures Program. You know, critics point out that a reenacted budget would only spur patronage politics, moving the power of the purse away from the legislative branch into the executive of government. What do you make of it?
Well, that's insofar as savings is concerned. No? There's a lot of caveat to that statement. Not completely, it doesn't completely shift to the executive department. That some amounts will be shifted to the executive department. Nevertheless, if you look at the totality is almost 1.6 trillion pesos of our budget goes to infra spending. If you take that out, you're taking out 1.6 trillion pesos out of our economy in terms of infra spending. And the multiplier effect of infra is around 10 times. So you're removing almost 10 trillion pesos out of our economy. You know, so that's, for me, that's a much bigger worry in terms of driving our economy.
As a final point, Sen Win, what is that one structural flaw in the budget process that you want reformed before the 2026 GAA is passed?
Well, we have to go back to the basics, Cathy. Let's remove the syndicates in DPWH. It really starts with the syndicates, and because the syndicates are conniving with the contractors, and these people. If you look at the budget process, it's the district engineer that suggests all those line items that we see in the National Expenditure Program. So if those people are conniving with one another, those connivances will end up in our National Expenditure Program. Then you have a budget that is suggested by people who are conniving to create corruption at the district level. Could the syndicates, the connivances, go beyond the DPWH? It can. I am not ruling out that possibility. It can. So that's why the independent commission will look at the entire ecosystem of how projects are being suggested and projects are being tackled. So the independent commission should look at from not step 1, but step 0, all the way to implementing the project. Well, tough tasks ahead. Sen Win, we'll be watching. Thank you so much for the time. Senator Win Gatchalian of the Senate Finance Committee. Well, the Department of Trade and Industry will release the companies facing revocation from the Philippine Contractors Accreditation Board once a turnover of leadership is completed. This as Secretary Cristina Roque confirms the resignation of Executive Director Herbert Matienzo. In a statement yesterday, Wednesday, DTI said all PCAB-accredited contractors will be subjected to a comprehensive review. The list of contractors whose licenses could potentially be stripped will then be publicized. The review will be done once PCAB receives the turnover documents from Matienzo, who gave up his post yesterday.
Roque has placed PCAB and the Construction Industry Association of the Philippines under her direct supervision. The move, she says, will ensure transparency and accountability be restored within those agencies. Meanwhile, PCAB has revoked the contractor licenses of 9 construction firms linked to the Sara and Curly Discaya. PCAB issued the revocation order via Board Resolution number 075 dated September 1. The board cited Sara's admission during Monday's Senate Blue Ribbon hearing, wherein she's owner or part owner of 9 firms. PCAB said that these firms have colluded through joint or multiple bidding participation, undermining competition and fairness. According to the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, Discaya-linked firms have bagged over 31 billion pesos in flood control deals since 2022. The family's legal team takes exception to the revocation order.
Wala po kami napag-usapan ni Sir Curly, pero kung ni-revoke, ano kaya ang basihan? Kasi dapat may due process yan. Hindi basta-basta nire-revoke. Si ma'am, sa Alpha at Omega lang siya. Nakapag-divest na siya sa 8. Documented po yan.
The Justice Department has signed an immigration lookout bulletin order against contractors linked to anomalous projects. DOJ spokesperson Assistant Secretary Miko Clavano said the ILBO that Secretary Boying Remulla signed covers the first batch of names requested by Senate Blue Ribbon Committee Chair Senator Rodante Marcoleta. Earlier, newly installed DPWH Secretary Vince Dizon also requested for an immigration lookout as part of their investigation. This comes following reports that some of those linked to the anomalies may have already left the country. Marcoleta said he has information that 2 contractors are now in the U.S., though he did not identify who. The government is tightening flood control project approvals amid alleged corruption in the Public Works Department. The Economy and Development Council's Cabinet Committee has approved a resolution requiring a comprehensive review of flood control initiatives. Under the guidelines, projects will now be aggregated by river basin, ensuring more are subject to technical, environmental, and economic scrutiny. The move aims to improve project quality and promote a unified strategy for long-term flood mitigation. The resolution also designates the DPWH as the lead in submitting projects. You're watching Money Talks. Coming up, a neophyte lawmaker wants to lower the country's value-added tax. And our conversation with Nicolas Mapa with Metrobank on August inflation's forecast. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back to Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. A neophyte lawmaker wants to cut the country's value-added tax from 12 to 10%. Batangas 1st District Representative Leandro Leviste has filed the VAT Reduction Act of 2025, also known as House Bill 4302. He says the 2 percentage point cut will help ease inflation and lower basic commodity prices, which will provide relief for millions of Filipino households. The lawmaker argues stronger consumption and better tax compliance could temper possible revenue losses. The country currently imposes the highest VAT in Southeast Asia at 12%. By comparison, Indonesia charges 11%, Singapore 9%, and some neighboring countries lower than Thailand's 7%. Levista says lower rates would make the country more regionally competitive while spurring domestic spending. U.S. markets were a mixed bag yesterday, Wednesday, as tech stocks rose, but investors braced for more volatility this month. The Nasdaq jumped by over 1%, S&P 500 advanced by 0.5%, and the Dow fell by less than 0.1%. Benchmark 10-year Treasury yields ticked down to 4.211%. Gold prices posted another record at $3,593 per troy ounce. U.S. futures are pointing to a mixed bag when the markets open later tonight Manila time. Nasdaq is up by nearly 0.25%, S&P up by 0.1%, and the Dow falls by less than 0.1%. Asian markets are tracking Wall Street's gains on its tech rally this Thursday. Japan's Nikkei 225 is up by over 1%. Australia's ASX 200 rises by 0.7%, and South Korea's Kospi climbs by over 1/4%. And a quick check on our own markets here in the Philippines. PSEI opening today higher by 0.2% at 6,095, barely above 6,000 but below the 6,100 mark. Local bourse extending its losses for a fifth straight session. That will be yesterday, tumbling by 0.75%. The markets continue to be under sustained selling pressure amid uncertainties and other news weighing on investor sentiment, according to Regina Capital. The broader all-shares index slid by 0.4%, with the sectoral gauges a mixed bag. As for the Philippine peso, it opens today unchanged, 57.30 to the dollar. Peso closed yesterday stronger at 57.30 against the greenback. And the 10-year government bond yields have ticked up to 6.033%. August inflation results are out tomorrow, Friday at 9 a.m. Philippine Standard Time. Metrobank is one of 16 surveyed by Business World, forecasting a median 1.3% rise in consumer prices for August, faster than July's 0.9%. That is still well below the bottom end of the government's target range of between 2 and 3%. The Bangko Central's inflation estimate for August falls between 1 and 1.8%, and its inflation forecast for 2025 stands at 1.7%. With us now for more is Nicolas Mapa, Chief Economist at Metrobank. Good to see you again. Nick, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Cathy. Thanks for having me.
So you're spot on in our Business World survey at 1.3%. Among 16 we surveyed, you're one of 6 that actually are tipping for the median. How did you come up with 1.3?
Yeah, well, we're seeing a bit of a pickup in headline inflation from last month. Last month, it was 0.9%. The uptick is traced largely to higher electricity prices across the board. We're seeing higher generation or prices for electricity in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, as well as higher fish and vegetable prices. Higher vegetable prices, we're tagging this to, we did see a spate of storms that came in over the past few weeks, and that should impact prices for vegetables. On the downside, we're looking at rice disinflation or deflation to continue to weigh or to offset some of the uptick in headline inflation.
To your point on rice disinflation, I mean, this August result isn't going to capture the impact of the suspension in rice imports because that just started in September 1st. So what difference do you think that would make in the pass-through effects to consumer price in the September inflation reading?
Yeah, well, September is generally a low import volume month anyways. This is when harvest season kicks in. So we're getting a lot of local supply. We also do have quite a bit of domestic rice supply. So I don't think the ban would impact prices significantly in the sense because there's so much rice in our stocks anyway. So that we'll likely just see headline inflation tick slightly higher, but not likely to be material in the coming months.
And then the fourth quarter rolls in, and that means Christmas spending. In what way could the holiday season prompt the final follow-through rate cut by the Bangko Sentral?
Yeah, well, given that inflation is computed on a year-on-year basis, there will be demand-side pressures this year, just like last year. But we are expecting inflation to continue to trend higher, largely because of the base effects sort of waning or fading by the end of the year. That being said, even if inflation does tick higher, I think BSP continues to have ample space to cut policy rates to provide support to the economy. Cathy, we're in a situation now where we're seeing inflation at these levels. We tend to forget that just 30 months ago, inflation was 8%. 20 months ago, inflation was 6%. Now we see inflation at 0.9, 1.3, maybe in the coming months, maybe 1.9, 2%. So we are still at the lower band of the BSP's inflation target. So there's really more than enough reason for the BSP to provide support, all the more given that we've been sort of treading the low end of the government's official growth target of 5.5%.
We have. I mean, just look at the chart there. It's really a massive peak at one point and then a steady decline. So that means a lot more room for the Bangko Sentral to cut rates. That's a given. But about the timing, though, when is it going to affect the next rate cut, which would make it the fourth this year?
Yeah, well, we had expected BSP to cut in August. We also penciled in a pause for October, largely because we feel the BSP will be watching the Fed and what the Fed decides to do. That's why we actually expect the last cut for this year to come around at their December meeting. So pause in October, wait things out, just see how data plays out, see where the Fed takes policy rates, and then maybe decide by December. With inflation still quite manageable, with growth still needing a bit of a boost, this could give Governor Remolona enough leeway to cut policy rates before the end of the year.
Final point, what is that going to mean for the peso then with narrower interest rate differentials ahead?
Yeah, well, with the Fed expected to cut in September and also expected to cut in November, we feel that interest rate differentials will be maintained. The peso, just because of seasonal factors, could see some appreciation pressure before the end of the year as we roll into those Burr months and the remittances start to come in.
All right, we're just about 24 hours away from that inflation result. We'll be watching. Thank you so much, Nick Mapa of Metrobank.
Thank you.
Insights.
Have a good day. Bye.
In corporate news, Metro Pacific Investment Corp's water unit says it is still interested in buying Villar-owned Prime Water. Metro Pacific Water President and CEO Andrew Pangilinan told Business World the move will depend on data shared by Prime Water. This comes after former Senator Cynthia Villar revealed that her husband, businessman Manny Villar, wants to dispose the company, claiming it is being used against them politically amid criticisms of its services. President Marcos has earlier ordered the local water utilities administration to investigate Prime Water over consumer complaints covering its 73 joint venture deals with water districts. MPIC and Signal, the owner of this channel, are both part of the MVP Group. Power prices in the country's wholesale electricity spot market has increased again in August following widespread plant outages that led to a lower supply margin. Data from the Independent Electricity Market Operator show system-wide WESM rates climbing 15% to over 4.59 pesos per kilowatt hour from July's 3.99 pesos. It also showed supply slipping by nearly 1%, while demand grew by almost 2%. Regionally, prices in Luzon fell to 3.76 pesos, but rose in the Visayas and Mindanao, 6.40 and 6.60 pesos per kilowatt hour respectively. This as several plants went offline, triggering yellow alerts. Higher WESM rates for August will be reflected in the consumer's generation charges this month. And before we go, the trailer for the adaptation of Emily Bronte's classic Wuthering Heights is out. The film stars Margot Robbie as Cathy and Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff, directed by promising young woman and Saltburn's Emerald Fennell. The trailer teases passion, class rivalries, and revenge, all set to Charlie XCX's Everything is Romantic. Wuthering Heights opens in cinemas Valentine's Day 2026. Now, don't we celebrate Christmas first? That's about 5 months away. That is it for Money Talks. I'm Cathy Yang. Catch us again tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. here on One News. Have a great day ahead.